Good morning, everyone. Sorry for the slight delay. I declare the meeting open at 9:03 a.m. Pursuant to Section 13 of the local law, I'm inviting the Interim Management Committee members, Jan Taylor, Simone Webb, Steve Greenwood, Rob Jones and Stan Gale, I don't know why I'm reading out your names, to address any matters before the committee today. I'm bound to declare a conflict of interest and potential perceived conflicts of interest, and I shall do so. Members of the Interim Management Committee are not legally bound to do so, but in accordance with the Interim Management Charter, they have declared that they will also do that. So thank you very much. Ipswich City Council respectfully acknowledges traditional owners as custodians of the land upon which we meet. We pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging as the keepers of the tradition, cultures and stories of a proud people. Could you mind standing for the opening prayer, please? Let us pray or reflect on our responsibilities to the people of Ipswich. We meet today to serve our community, to use our resources wisely and well, to represent all members of our community fairly, and to make decisions that promote the common good. Thank you. We do not have any apologies or leaves of absence. Agenda item E, condolences and memorials, we don't have any. And F, additions and presentations, none. Agenda item G, confirmation of the minutes of the previous council meeting of the 29th of January. There's an amendment to the draft of the minutes that were produced at that time. This is particularly regarding the issue of covenants of land. You might recall at the last meeting we agreed it would be inappropriate to seek a covenant on the land for the Swifts. It was a matter we discussed, so we had some legal advice to correct or make the recommendation legally accurate. So we've done that, and that's reflected in the minutes. Any discussion about that issue? Yes, Simone.
I just would like to offer a comment on that. The adjustment suggests, unlike the previous discussion, rather than it be in perpetuity, that it would also be or until released by council, which presumably is on the legal advice.
Yes.
Just offering a comment on that. If the market value is on the land, if there's a covenant on the land, that affects the market value.
Correct.
Yes.
As I understand it, yes.
Yes.
Not being a valuer.
Yes. Yes, it would. Such that if, as per previous discussion, it was in perpetuity, it would have a value less the impact of that covenant. If there is a provision, as is suggested now, for that covenant to be open to removal by a council at some future point and not be in perpetuity, there is the possibility of a scenario then of quite a significant, or at least a windfall, or at least a benefit from that changing value by the option of the council removing the covenant. So it's a different scenario to one that we discussed before, because previously, if it was for community use and a lower value as a result of that, well, for the council's public interest, that's the same, because it's always meant to be for community use. Mm. If the council's decision is to dispose of the land for community use unless and until the council decides otherwise, then that is in effect a different position, a different decision, and it may in the process have a difference in terms of value benefit for the purchaser. So I wonder whether it would be appropriate to firstly inform council, you may have seen it in any event, Chair, of the legal advice so that there's a clear understanding of why it needs to be or until released by council, and the circumstances in which council can and should so release, so that there's a clear understanding about that. And secondly, it may be prudent also to request the valuers to price the land before and after impact of the covenant, so that a clear-minded decision can be made as to whether the covenant in fact is a good idea or not, in terms of the overall public interest for the community, as it is an asset of the council. And thirdly, I didn't notice in here, and it may be a function of it preceding the change of format for related parties to be identified, I'm not sure if it is or isn't, but it may, in the course of this discussion, be appropriate to have the related parties be identified also, given that there's the possible risks that we've identified previously.
Understand. Any other comments from the committee? I've not read the legal report. I'm aware that there is the report, so I understand what you're saying. I think we might adopt the minutes as amended with an addition to that for the next next committee meeting to come through to consider that legal advice and the implications on the valuation as you've discussed.
Yeah.
And the ability to come back and amend that or put in another resolution later on. Comfortable? Okay. So with that exception, we'll take the minutes as agreed. Thank you. Agenda item H, reception consideration of committee reports. So we had the 5 committee reports. Economic Development Committee report. Accept the minutes of that report. Just making a comment about event sponsorship. The discussion of that committee, I think, was a good discussion in terms of council at some point coming back with a delegation so that the smaller valued grants for event sponsorship could be dealt with under delegation by council officers, and that was to encourage future councillors to really focus on the strategic areas as opposed to some of the detailed operational smaller grants. Those grants would still be reported to council, of course, so there's clarity that the council would still see them at the end of the day in some form, but letting that delegation go on. So I think that was a good discussion, good decision. So take those minutes as approved. Growth and Infrastructure Committee report. A key issue at discussion for recollection of that committee was the need in future reports about easements of land or proposed easements of land and resumptions of land to have clearer discussion about the status of discussions without going into commercial details, of course, the status of discussions with owners and stakeholders, and the clearer statements about the potential implications for owners and stakeholders if land is resumed for certain public purposes. I'm conscious that could transgress into some private matters or commercial matters that need to be dealt with in confidence, but I think we can do that in the reports to some extent. So take that report as approved. Community report approved. Minutes approved. Environment Committee. There were a number of issues here, some of which now reached meaty discussion. I notice the tender consideration plan for Visi. I think again that was a good recommendation by officers and approved by that committee, recommended by that committee and approved as part of these minutes that we have a contract with Visi for the recycling of Ipswich waste for a year, with a year extension. And that gives us time to proceed and resolve issues through the expression of interest campaign that we're doing with the other sub-regional councils. So that whole sub-regional waste management expression of interest process that again is in the public domain, I think is a great strategy for us to deal with waste in a strategic and sub-regional way rather than council by council. And this 2-year contract is no more or no less than, in my view, buying us time, so to speak, to continue with the current waste management until we resolve what's a better longer-term solution. The Ipswich Nature Reserve was also discussed there. The committee recommended, and again today resolving to come back with another report. That's not a view that we're against. I'm against the proposed redevelopment of the Nature Reserve. It really needs some greater clarity, I think, in terms of what's the strategy, the underlying usage, how important it is for the city in an economic and community sense. That was the discussion that we had at committee, that for the benefit of people observing this meeting, I think needs to get reflected, that we're really just after, as a group, an understanding of the strategy and importance from an economic and community point of view before we proceed to commit to a master plan of some $9 or so million, I think, from memory. And the last issue I wanted to raise was the recycling, which again has reached some media reports, the Riverview Recycling and Refuge Centre. So the committee didn't accept all the report's recommendations from memory. Weekend and weekdays will still be allowed from certain residents of Brisbane into that recycling facility. The use of the vouchers still applies, except the voucher for 100 kilograms now means 100 kilograms, so that if residents of certain suburbs, of nearby suburbs of Brisbane, can use Riverview Dump any day of the week using the BCC vouchers, and 100 kilograms voucher entitles 100 kilograms of waste. And I think that's a pretty fair and equitable kind of process across both local governments. So take those Environment Committee report as approved. And Governance Committee report also approved. All right, steamroll through those. Any comments on the way through from IMC members? No. Agenda item I, consideration of notified motions, we have none. J, reception of notices of motion for future meetings, none. K, questions, none. L, officers report, we do have one. Future audit and risk management committee meetings. Thanks, Rob, particularly for your help on this. Much appreciated. A couple of comments on page 2 of that report. I want to raise, the appointment of the external chair and our intention for the majority of independent people to be on this audit committee and have an independent chair. I think it's an independent chair, majority of members of the committee being independent, minority of future councillors. I think it's an appropriate way for governance for the council in the future. So, unless there's any comments, I'd take that report. The recommendations A and B are approved on the report. Okay. Any other business? I've lost my agenda, sorry. Consideration of items placed on the agenda by a councillor. Section 6 and 8, I have nil. No other business. Meeting closed at 9:15 a.m. Thank you.